Welcome, Martina. Welcome to the Inner Experience podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Thank you, Sam. It's beautiful to be here with you.
Now, I know you have so much experience in working with both men and women in intimacy, in relationships, with a tantric background. And there's so many different topics that I know we could explore, but there's one that I feel like you've spoken really well on in particular that I'd love to bring up with you today. And I'm literally just going straight into it because I know as soon as we open this can of worms, there's so much to say. And that's all around sexual shame in general, sexual shame that comes up for people with sexuality. So in the time that you've been in this work, is this something that's been there since the beginning?
I've been working in this space for 15 years. And so, of course, I've been working with sexual shame along the way. I would say it's come into really sharp awareness for me, let's say in the last 5 or 6 years, is that sexual shame for men is a conversation that is not happening yet in our society. And I've had the great honor and privilege of working with thousands of men in individual settings, but also in group spaces, groups of men, but also groups of men and women together. And time again, felt my own heart break a little bit for men, as I've heard men, really good men, good-hearted, genuine, authentic men, share that they've lived their lives feeling like they're a sexual predator until they prove otherwise, because men's sexuality has been so demonized. And so men have a lot of shame and judgments about having a penis, about, being a man, that there's a sense of they're guilty until they prove otherwise for them, which is quite heartbreaking to have witnessed. And I've witnessed it in a lot of men, so I know it's quite a common phenomenon.
This is such an important conversation because I find there's so much now support out there for women and conversations happening around shame for like sexuality or in women. And I also have been amongst this work, not as long as you, but like in different conversations and circles and work. And I'm finding that it's not talked about. Like you said, it's just not talked about for men. And I'm as a woman who's interested in men, like intimately, I think it's valuable. I think it's valuable as a woman to understand this instead of what I see at the moment, especially, is a lot of blame still happening, right? Mm-hmm. So let's move into this topic more, and I'm being super sensitive around this because I understand that it could be a confronting topic for people, and kind of there might be some stuff that might come up for people as they're listening to this. So I'm being sensitive to how I kind of like talk about it. But what do you find for men? Like, what do you find comes up for men around them not being able to like show up as a man in terms of their sexuality?
I'll give you an example from a workshop I was running probably around 7 years ago. I remember sitting in this room with around 10 to 12 men in the room, and each of them sharing a little bit of what was alive in their relationship and their sexual life. And I just had this phrase that kept coming to me as I listened to each man. And this phrase was like, oh, he's cut his penis off. He's cut his penis off. I had this sense that each man was showing up in his life without his penis being energetically intact. Of course, none of these men had physically dismembered themselves, but there was a sense that they were apologetic for having a penis. And so by the time I heard all of the men share, I actually found like the courage to say, it feels like all of you are leaving your penis outside of the room when you walk into a space with a woman. And they're all like, yeah, that's what happens. That's what happens. And so energetically, it's like a lot of men are walking around with that part of themselves missing. So then, in the process of that, they deny their connection to their drive, their motivation, their direction, their passion, because the energy, when we look at the physicality of a penis, it's about direction, passion, that sense of, creating drive. But when a man energetically disconnects from that, it's like he disconnects from those qualities in his life. And so then we see a lot of men walking around trying to be really nice and good guys, and often falling into the trap of being a woman's best friend, and being the one who will do all the beautiful things for a woman, but then finds himself going home alone because he's got so many women as best friends, but wondering why he's not making the romantic and the intimate connection. Now, for us as women, we actually need something to respond to. So when a man is energetically disconnected from his sexuality, there's no sexual response that can arise in our body in response to him. So the thing that a man thinks he's doing to keep himself safe, it's a disservice to him, but it's also a disservice to us women, because there's nothing for us to respond to.
Oof. Okay. Oh, this is good. Okay. So this is really interesting because I often find there is a lot of men confused about how to show up, how to show up for a woman, how to show up if they're coming across as a predator, or if they need to be the classic nice guy. And what's interesting is, as a woman, you like you say, even if we realize it or not, we're waiting for that thing to respond to. We're waiting for them to show up. We're waiting for them to not be the nice guy, so to speak, but to give us, to show up differently. What is that thing that what is that showing up differently? Is it the fact that if they're disconnected from the sexuality, they don't have a mission, a purpose, a drive in life, in their own life, and so that doesn't necessarily make us feel safe or turn us on? Or what is the thing that's, that we're wanting them to show up in?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best ways to understand this is to look at the extremes. So, for example, if a man's on a date with a woman, and we'll talk to the extremes first, so that then we can come back to the middle path, which is the healthy path. So at one end of the extreme, the man's there, he's being nice, he's making sure he doesn't touch her, he's really keeping himself very much contained. He might be hunched in his shoulders, hunched in his back, really polite and careful and cautious in everything that he says and does. So there's a sense that he's really shrinking himself down physically and energetically. At the other end of the spectrum, the other unhealthy end, we have the man who is acting out of bravado. So he's kind of wearing his sex on the outside, and he's looking at her going love to get her into bed. I really want to bed this woman, and I want to be able to do this to her, and I want to do that to her, and imagine how great she's going to look naked. So, of course, that man is projecting the sexual energy forward and, imagining things that may or may not happen. So, of course, a woman is going to feel unsafe in that scenario. But the man who is able to hold and feel and embody his energy in a natural way will allow that natural sexual charge. If he feels desire, he will be accepting of his own desire. He will be accepting that that desire is his desire, not something to be thrown on to the woman, not something to fantasize or project about. He might notice the woman and be like, oh, she is so beautiful. And just to say, I love your smile. I love the way your eyes are sparkling right now. And he can say that with the fullness of his desire and energy underneath it, but without going into any way that feels predatory or unsafe. And there's a sense then that the tension can build up between the two on this date, because he's there appreciating her, you know, admiring her, embodying his own energy and desire. And as a woman in this situation, and this is something that, you know, we as women love, but we're often a little terrified of, because it's vulnerable, because there's electrical charge in the air. It's like, oh, he's noticing me and it feels good. Oh, I want to respond to him. And so when a woman is in her healthy responsiveness, she'll let herself smile in response. She'll feel him, you know, perhaps graze her hand across the table, and she'll feel the thrill of charge that goes through her body. She'll let the receptivity be at the front of her body so that he can see that he's having an effect on her.
Mm. Oh, this is beautiful. What is an unhealthy receptivity from a woman's perspective? Like, is there such thing as there's just no chemistry, and so therefore I'm just like, he might be showing up in a really beautiful way and having this really nice balance, but I'm just not feeling that chemistry. It's just not there. Is that a thing, or is that an unhealthy sexual shame thing that's going on for a woman?
Mm. So again, a woman can be at different ends of the spectrum. So a woman might be, you know, so afraid of men generally because she's, you know, had some bad experiences in the past. And so a woman might be really contracted and feeling unsafe in her body and unable to receive the energy coming towards her. Or a woman might be quite hungry for a man's attention, so she might receive all that attention and be open in her receptivity, but then not respect the man and not respond to him in a way that is supportive or healthy. Sometimes women will take the energy coming from a man and not be respecting him, so then not be honest about what she's feeling. Whereas if a woman's in her healthy, natural embodiment, she'll be able to notice in her body, like, oh, yeah, this feels good. I can respond to him because there's a reciprocal energy. Or it might be that she goes, oh, I can feel that he's interested in me, and I just don't feel the same. I'm going to have to let him know. So then when the woman comes from that place of her own maturity, she can still be receptive and open, but go, you know, I'm really flattered that you know, you're paying me this attention. I need to let you know that I don't feel the same way. I'd be happy to be friends if that's okay for you. So that way it has a sense of, yeah, meeting in a natural way, being transparent and not using each other in a transactional exchange.
Do you think that's what men need to hear or want to hear?
Well, it's not necessarily what they want to hear, but a man will grow through feeling respected. So if a woman says no to a man and she respects him in the saying no, then there's an opportunity for him to grow through that. Whereas if a woman shames a man, puts him down, diminishes him, or makes him feel less than for his attraction, then of course that adds to unhealthy male behaviors.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really interesting one to navigate, because of course no one wants to be or feel rejected. And yet there's like, where's that line between being honest and communicating and being transparent, or ghosting because you don't want to have that conversation? And I've had so many interesting conversations around this, around men that will say, no, if you don't like someone, you just ghost them because it's easier than to have a confronting conversation. And I'm like, but is it though? Like, is it like the loop's not closed? Like, you're kind of left guessing, left wondering. Like, is it just that we're all on different spectrums of what we're comfortable hearing, and so therefore we're going to opt for a certain behavior? Or is it that we're scared of feeling rejected?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen men and women go through the experience of being ghosted, and how excruciating that is, because there's a sense of not knowing.
Yeah.
And I think that we can have honest, transparent conversations and still be kind. I think a lot of what happens, if people are saying they'd prefer to be ghosted, they're frightened that they're going to hear diminishing, shameful, or negatively impacting comments from the other person. I think that in a lot of ways in our society, we're not particularly mature around dating and relationships. And being more mature means that we can have some real and transparent conversations and yet still be kind.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
I love that you've been so, so beautiful in picking me up for dinner and taking me to this gorgeous restaurant. I just need to let you know that I don't see a future relationship for us. There's nothing unkind in that. It's
Yeah.
just, this is where I'm at,
Yeah.
and an appreciation for what's
Yes.
been offered.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful thing, like just to, like, I know and even as a woman, just to be like, hey, like what I really loved about meeting you tonight, or like this exchange that we've had, is I've really appreciated this, and this about you. And, it's not for me, but this is, this was a great exchange. I learned this from you, or I'm grateful for this. And I think that's just like, like, everything's not meant to be like a forever thing. And if you can,
No,
if you kind of are left with, at least I made some sort of impact on them tonight, then that exchange feels really valuable to me. And so it's almost like
absolutely.
just needing to hear that. And I know for men, like appreciation for men is a big thing. They just want to feel appreciated, right? And so if we can let them
Absolutely.
know that this exchange, I really appreciated this tonight, and I really love this about you, but I'm just not into it, then I feel like we need to get better at being able to just hear that stuff.
Yes, yes. Because a lot of people are rejecting themselves already. There's a lot of times when I work with single men, they're frightened to approach women. And so, because they're so frightened of rejection, they end up rejecting themselves before they even give a woman a chance to reject them.
Mm. What does
And,
that look like?
so rejecting themselves means that they don't approach the woman, or they have a conversation, but they don't ask her out, or they don't, let that electrical charge come forward in a conversation. So when a man is rejecting himself, he's automatically assuming that women are going to say no to him, which means that the woman's not even being given the opportunity to say yes or no to him.
That's really interesting as well, isn't it? And
Yeah.
so, what do men need to really like move through the sexual shame that they're experiencing?
Yeah. I mean, of course, in a healthy relationship, there's a tremendous amount of healing that can happen through the man and the woman, having some specific experiences to create healing, love, acceptance, and to overcome the sexual shame for a man. In my relationship, there's a practice that I call cupping the penis, of just holding my hand without any agenda, without any desire to make anything happen, but just cupping the penis with one hand for an extended period of time, so that in that there's a sense that my partner feels loved, he feels accepted, he doesn't have to perform. His penis is being, you know, loved and worshipped and honored as an integral part of our relationship.
Mm.
If men are single, part of the work that I see and that I work with men around is for a man to make his penis his own best friend. So a man starts loving and honoring his penis for himself, instead of the judgmental thoughts or the shame or the put downs or diminishing way he talks to himself about his penis, about his sexual desires, sexual energy. A man can start to touch himself, to self pleasure, to connect with his body in such a way that the penis becomes a more integrated part of who he is, because men's relationship to their penis is often quite externalized in that he looks down and he can see it, he can reach down and touch it. But when a man makes his penis a more integrated experience of himself and his body, there's a sense that he can breathe through his body and just feel down through the pelvis, through the pubic bone and into the penis. So there's more sense of that energy that moves and flows through the body and into the penis. And instead of judging himself for his sexual desires, he really makes friends with his desires and lets his desires be a natural, healthy expression of who he is, such that he can walk down the street, feel that desire, feel that energy, smile at a beautiful woman without projecting sexual energy onto her and without having to shrink himself.
Oh, okay. And what's come up for me as you've spoken about this is a couple of things. The first thing I would say is how do they know that they might be experiencing some level of sexual shame?
Sorry, what was the question again? How do
So
they know?
yeah, so how do men know if they are experiencing some sexual shame or disconnect from their penis?
Yeah. So they need to get curious about what thoughts they have. And I've often seen this when I've worked one on one with men. They often have a derogatory language around their penis, like, oh, that thing, or,
Mm.
a real dismissive, diminishing sense of themselves sexually. So there can be a really obvious disconnect in that way, or it can be that men are operating out of bravado, like going, "Oh yeah, I'm good sexually, I'm good sexually," but that bravado is covering up vulnerability and under that the deep shame. So it comes back to men being honest about what their internal dialogue is about their penis and their sexual desires.
Mm, mhm.
And even becoming aware of how they touch their penis, because a lot of men will masturbate in order to ejaculate, to have that sense of gratification and release. But when I introduce them to the idea of self pleasure as an act of self love, as an act of self care, men are often confused and they don't know what that is. So I will encourage men that starting to use self pleasure as an act of self love is about stepping away from fantasy, stepping away from porn, and getting really, really curious about the sensations in their body, the sensations they feel when they breathe, the sensations they feel in their penis, but then also to start to touch themselves in non-habitual ways. So, for example, if a man always masturbates with his right hand, he might do self-pleasure with his left hand. If he has a certain rhythm and pace that he uses in masturbation, then he will use a slower or a different rhythm and pace in self-pleasure, so that he starts to re-sensitize his entire sexual experience. When men have masturbated and had sex in a very habitual way, a man tends to become quite desensitized through the shaft of his penis and through the rest of his body, such that the man is then only feeling sensation in the head of the penis. And when a man's only feeling sensation in the head of the penis, when he has sex, he needs to keep moving and thrusting in sex in order to feel stimulation on the head of the penis. However, when a man embraces self-pleasure and starts to make his penis his best friend, the shaft sensitizes the testicles, the groin, the belly. He can start to feel sexual pleasure through his whole body. And then when he makes love with a woman, his penis is able to read a woman's body, to read her vagina, and create a deeper level of connection, intimacy, and flow between their genitals.
Fuck, this is so interesting. Oh my God. My mind is blown a bit. Okay. So this is so interesting because there is so much, and I've had numerous conversations with other speakers on the podcast around this exact thing, but for women, right? Like the idea of self-pleasure and, touching ourselves, but not necessarily for masturbation, but like for getting to know our bodies and sinking deeper into our pleasure and for self-love and all of these things. And so it's the same for men. I've never heard that before.
Absolutely, absolutely. In our training program, we're currently doing a 63-day self-pleasure challenge, and there are men and women in the group, so they're going through these experiences at the moment of rediscovering sensitivity and receptivity and aliveness and vibrancy in the body. And some of the men, where they've had a lack of sensation, a lack of feeling in their penis, are starting to rediscover their bodies in a whole new way.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk on your perspective for the women then. What is the desensitizing for women that needs to take place in self-pleasure?
Or resensitizing rather than
Yeah.
desensitizing.
Yeah, we don't want to desensitize anymore, do we? We want to resensitize.
Resensitize, yeah. Generally, one of the big things and challenging conversations for women is to give up their vibrators, because vibrators contribute a lot to the desensitization of a woman's vagina. Also, it's important for a woman to really get to know her vagina inside and out, to explore the vulva, the lips, the external parts with gentle, curious, exploratory hands, but also to take her fingers inside and get to feel the different sensations, textures, all the nuances of the internal parts of the vagina. Women often overly focus on their clitoris, or they overly focus on vibrator type sensations. But there's so much more that's possible for our bodies. So similar to what I said about men, when women learn to breathe more deeply into their vagina, to change their habitual ways of touch, to explore the vagina inside and out, and just to be really, really curious about what feels good. One of the things for women too is that going straight to a woman's vagina can be too much too soon, even in self-pleasure. So a woman might find that giving herself a breast massage first, or caressing her limbs or her trunk first, really helps to open her body, rather than going directly to the vagina as the first point of contact.
I definitely find that is true for me.
Mm.
The question that I had was around how to go about starting to explore the inside of your vagina, like different parts of your vagina that's not the habitual, like kind of getting off kind of mentality. If there's sexual trauma there, if there's sexual shame there, there's like this resistance to go there. How do you move through that?
Yeah. So being very, very gentle and slow. So if pain comes up, to even just like, if a woman has her fingers inside of her vagina and she starts to feel pain, rather than to immediately stop, because in immediately stopping, she's reinforcing a belief that she can't handle it. So I'm not suggesting to push through the pain, but let's say there's a spot inside the vagina 2 centimeters in where there's pain, and she has her finger against that spot. So keep the finger there, take the pressure off, take enough pressure off so that it's not strongly painful, but stay connected to what's present in that part of the vagina. And then she can take some deep breaths, and she can breathe into it and even ask herself, okay, is there trauma here? Is there something I'm holding on to from a past relationship? Is there something here I can release? And so even by asking herself those questions, she can take some deep breaths, she can undulate and rock and move a little through her pelvis, her spine, her using her whole body to kind of move and help with the release of that emotion and that energy. And she may actually find that then more sensation and aliveness starts to be present in her vagina, because she can breathe and work her way through the pain, through the trauma.
Yeah, I really like that. With like not being taught a lot around pleasure, self-pleasure, outside of what we kind of know around like the clitoris and stuff like that, how do we start to explore what pleasure might feel like outside of that? Like, is there a right or wrong way? Is there resources? Is there like just through exploration? Like, how do you start to do that without using a vibrator or something like this?
Yeah. I often encourage people to step even further back. So, for example, just to even take fingertips to the inside of the forearm where the skin's quite soft and receptive, and just even starting to explore pleasure through touch of fingertips on the forearm. Sounds really, really simple. And yet it can be incredibly challenging for people to just breathe and relax and go, oh, actually, that feels really good. Like, I have both men and women surprised when they discover that any part of the body can be highly sensitive, highly receptive, and bring about a lot of pleasure and feeling. But we need to slow down enough, engage with our breath, engage with the awareness of our body, and be relaxed in order to feel those things.
Oh, it's so true. Like, and even as you were speaking, I remembered to breathe and let go of my stomach, because often like we are so like, everything's sucked in rigid, and it cuts off that feeling body. And I remember being in the intimacy course in the States and like learning about like unleashing that part of me that holds my stomach in and like doesn't like fully breathe in. And as soon as I started to practice this and be in practice with that, I could feel so much of myself and my yoni and that part of, and my part of my sexuality just start to numb. Like I could feel at an extra 60% to what I would normally feel just from like actually breathing and letting me slow down to actually feel it all sink in. And I feel like, I don't know if it's the same for men, but I feel like as women, I have had numerous conversations with women who do the same, walk around with everything like sucked in and like not breathing properly. So we're cutting off from feeling. So even just that practice of what you just said of like, you're touching our forearm, but allowing ourselves to fully breathe and let go of our whatever we're sucking in is so powerful.
Definitely, definitely. People carry so much tension in the body, and energy, sensation, feeling is designed to move through our body. Essentially, our body is, a series of tubes, and energy is meant to run up and down through the meridians, all the pathways in the body. But if we take a hose, for example, and you turn the tap on, but then you kink the hose, the water doesn't get through. And so the tension that we tend to carry from the jaw, the neck, the shoulders, the back, the hips, the pelvic floor, the abdominal muscles, the groin, all those muscles that tend to hold tight, means that energy flows can't move through our body. So then we limit our capacity for pleasure, for sensation, for feeling. And then that often leads to people looking to more extreme forms of pleasure and sensation, when in actual fact, if we relax and release the tension, there's so much magic available. Even in the subtleties of breathing, somebody can use their breath to really go into a beautiful, blissful orgasmic kind of state when the body is relaxed and they know how to move their energy in those kind of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, like for me, when I'm really deeply in that practice, like I could sit in stillness meditation and like almost orgasm. It's like you're so sensitive to every part of you from just your breath. And I think I hadn't experienced any of that up until like being in this work. So the question I have for you is, how important is keeping these kind of practices as a man and a woman if you're in relationship, or if you're, frequently having sex with a partner?
Keeping these practices alive, whether it's meditation, breathing, self-pleasure, some form of movement, the practices are essential, whether you're single or in a relationship, because what can happen in a relationship is that, and I've certainly done this myself at different times, is to get a little bit lazy and then be dependent on my partner for the feeling and experience of sexual energy moving through my body. But of course, if I get dependent on my partner for bringing that, then it sets up enmeshment, dependency, resentment in the relationship. But it also means instead of being two whole people meeting each other, we become two half people meeting each other, which is nowhere near as juicy or vibrant. So being in a relationship and having that sense of responsibility for my own practice means that then my body is more radiant, it's more vibrant, and there's more for my partner to respond to. And by him doing his practices, he brings more for me to respond to. So that way we're both coming towards each other from a place of fullness and nourishment and richness in our energy, rather than trying to get something from each other. Because whenever that dynamic of trying to get something from each other is alive, then we'll end up depleting each other, and that doesn't feel good.
Absolutely hear that. And so when I think about like how I've explored self-pleasure and intimacy in this work, right, it's unraveled for me so much outside of intimacy. It's unraveled so much around, how I show up in business and in life, what my definition of success and ambition is, what my relationship is with money, like all of this different stuff. Is it the same as going back to kind of what you were speaking about earlier for men? Is this the same for men who perhaps are experiencing a disconnect to who they are as a man, to their mission in life, to purpose, to drive, to motivation? Like if they're not really experiencing those traits or those things, is it perhaps because there is a disconnection from their penis, their sexuality? And if they were to really look into that could set them up for success in those other areas?
Yes. I think we're living in very confusing times for men,
Mm,
because the traditional provider protector role of the man is not required in the way that it once was, and women of course are able to provide and take care of themselves in whole new ways. And so there's a lot of men who are kind of even wondering, what's the point of a relationship? What's the point of all of this? Because women have come so much into our power that then we as women have forgotten the ways in which we need men as well. And so women often treat men as being indispensable, like, and that doesn't feel good for a man. So then a man's like, well, if she doesn't really need me, what's the point of being here? I might as well go do something else. And also a lot of men I work with have grown up in times with a lot of man bashing being part of our common dialogue. So, they might look to their fathers and they've noticed that their fathers were absent or too busy or doing this or doing that. And then their mothers were like, men only want one thing, and don't be that kind of man, and don't do this because you're a man. And so a lot of men I work with have grown up with quite unhealthy male role modeling. And so they get to a certain point where they're like, they don't even know how to be a man because they've seen a lot of unhealthy male behavior.
Mm.
And so the more a man comes back in touch with himself and starts to connect with who he is, what's of value to him, being able to feel his desires, being able to connect with the vulnerability in his body, to connect with his own emotional sensitivity, he can start to create a new blueprint for his own life and start to create a different quality of life, love, relationship.
I really love that. And, you know, I agree. I think it is a very confusing time for them. And at the same time, there's also, like I've heard you say before, there's a lot of beautiful men in the world and there's a lot of beautiful women in the world that, that I also find there's a lot of powerful women in the world who are also wanting a man, you know, to show up. And yet there's this like hesitance for men to show up fully because they're like, well, she doesn't need me. What's your take on this? Because you're a powerful woman, you're a woman on a mission, and you're also super feminine and have a beautiful relationship. And so how do you navigate that in terms of knowing that you can be the woman you want to be and that your man is there and he's showing up for you?
This is where, side by side with our power, we as women need to be responsible for the messages we're giving men. So, for example, in my relationship that I'm in now, but also in the relationship prior to this one, I received the reflection that it feels like you don't need me. And I remember at the time being so confused. It's like, but I do need him. Why does he feel like that? You know, because I had convinced myself I was being vulnerable in the relationship, but actually wasn't. I was showing up as the powerful woman in the relationship. And then I was going outside of the relationship to friends, to mentors, to teachers to address my vulnerabilities. And then coming back and reporting what I'd worked on when it was complete, but not being vulnerable in the moment, not expressing my feelings in a more authentic, in the moment kind of way. So I wasn't creating any space for my partner to contribute to me. One of the things I've quite commonly seen, and this certainly has happened in a prior relationship that I had, is that when a woman she brings a lot of her power to the relationship and the man feels like he's not needed, then the next relationship the man has will be with a woman who's incredibly high need and high demand and kind of a bit of a mess in her life. It's almost like the man goes from, you know, the powerful woman to the really incredibly needy, messy kind of woman because he wants to feel valuable. So what I understand now, like feeling valuable, making a contribution to a woman, feeling appreciated by a woman, they are very, very important things to a man. It's part of what creates the inspiration for a man to show up. So, you know, sharing my feelings with my partner is part of what inspires him to be there for me. But when I'm doing all my own problem solving and creating all my own direction and, you know, proving to him how powerful I am, then he's like, what's the point of even being here? So I think there's absolutely a lot of women say to me, well, you know, he just won't show up, or men just don't show up. You know, where are the men who will show up? But what women need to take responsibility for in that is that we're so busy pushing our energy forward in a powerful way and denying our own feminine that there's no space for the man to actually show up for us. So we as women need to be able to fall inside, to embrace our feminine by falling inside, and then allowing our feelings, our needs to be shared and communicated in a healthy, authentic way. And then when the man does contribute to our lives, when he is able to, share his thoughts and his inspiration and so on for our lives, then to truly, truly appreciate and respect him in that.
Mm.
I
Do you
think.
think do you think though, sorry to cut you off there, do you
Mhm.
think that there's also this feeling for a woman of, but if I express that, then they won't be able to handle my emotion? Or, we often hear like, oh, women, and I can't handle her emotion and I don't want to deal with that. And so often we're like, okay, like don't bring that to the table, because what happens if like it's not okay?
This is where people are confused about expressing their feelings, because often emotion comes in the form of attack and accusations and demands and judgments, whereas the true expression of feelings is, I feel really sad today, I'm hurting, I'm scared, I'm confused, I'm lost, or I'm angry, or I'm really frustrated, like to just communicate our feelings in simple ways. But often the communication of emotion will come in the form of attack. You're useless and you don't do anything right, and da da da,
Mm,
and that's the kind of stuff that is very abrasive and destroying to intimacy and relationship. And men are incredibly, incredibly sensitive on an emotional level, and women often don't respect men enough, aren't curious enough about men to discover a man's emotional sensitivities. If I go to Rod I still make these mistakes, but I'll have days when my feelings come out in the form of loaded weapons and accusations thrown at him, and he's not going to be very responsive to that, and I'm setting it up for a fight, and I have to take responsibility for the fact that if I go to him with accusations, I'm setting up the dynamic for a fight.
mm,
Whereas if I go to him and share my feelings in a transparent, honest, open way, then he can meet me in that kind of exchange. That's the kind of thing that inspires him to be there for me, to hold the space for me, to want to support me.
mm,
Um, and I think that in a lot of the conversations that we're having about the issues between women and men, one of the things we're not discussing is the lack of respect that women exhibit towards men.
mm,
And that lack of respect is actually soul destroying for men. There's a lot of really beautiful, good hearted men who experience disrespect in their relationships because a woman is unable to process some of her long held hurts about men that may have nothing to do with the man she's in a relationship with, but he's, there trying to show up, but in the face of disrespect, his love is not even being received.
mm. Is this the same for what men need to be able to feel like their vulnerabilities, their emotions, and their sensitivities are also being respected and held?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's much harder for a man to open up emotionally, and oftentimes women hold back emotionally, waiting until the man opens up emotionally, or we'll do this thing of trying to force him to open up. I made a video about this called sticking the fingers in too soon. So in Tantra, we have this recognition that a woman's vagina is her negative polarity. It's where she's sensitive and receptive. Her heart and her breasts are her positive polarity. It's where her energy is directive and forward moving. In a man's body, the man's penis is his positive polarity, so that's where he generates and directs energy from. His heart's his negative polarity. That's where he's most sensitive. That's where he receives energy. So if a man came up to a woman and put his fingers in her vagina, that would be too much too soon.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, as women, when we're getting to know men, we're pushy emotionally. We'll go up to men and we'll be like, tell me how you feel. What's going on for you? And we'll try and force him to open emotionally, which is the equivalent of sticking the fingers in too soon. It's like sticking your fingers into his heart polarity, which is the most sensitive and receptive part. And he's still going like, oh, I'm not sure if it's okay to open here yet.
Mm.
And so rather than waiting for men to open up emotionally, the more powerful way for a woman to be with this is to express her own feelings, to lead with her own vulnerability. And when a man sees that a woman is respectful and honoring of her own feelings, that she's sensitive to herself, that she's caring about feelings, when he sees those things in her, then he'll be like, oh, okay, it's safe for me to open up emotionally.
That's such a good analogy to understand that. Like,
Mm,
so valuable. And then to also for us to be sensitive to that, like to be really aware of that and sensitive to that, because there's been a lot of people that have shared with me, like men that have shared with me, they don't want to bring that to their partner because then they'll think I'm less than or not strong enough or considered weak, or that then they'll hold it against me in the future. And I think there's a lot of this fear that comes up, especially bringing it to your intimate relationship. And so if you can navigate it like that, it's the same as, like, in a way, as women, to make sure we're feeling safe, and if we can trust a man, we look at how they're navigating their own life. And if they're keeping their word and they say they're going to do something and they follow through on that, then that creates trust. So I love
mm,
that expression of, like, if they're seeing that we're open with our feelings and we're not blaming, but we're taking responsibility and we're sharing from the heart, then they witness us doing that, and then they start to feel more open to do that too. So I think that's a really good example.
yeah, yeah. And a lot of men are, quite scared on the emotional level, which is
Mm.
why they often use anger or bravado to protect themselves, because they've been told as young boys that it's not okay to be emotional, or they've had relationships with women where women have, in an angry moment, then like thrown, some of a man's emotional expression back against him, or
Sure.
manipulated a man via what he shared on an emotional level. So I think we need to, be supportive of our men to open up emotionally and make it safe by role modeling healthy feeling expression.
Absolutely. And I realize that so much of this conversation we've had is around really supporting men and really paying respect to them, what they're going through. So with that in mind, what is some other things that we can be more mindful of, and to really help them and make them feel like they can show up and be the man and lead with their penis and not leave it out of the room? What are some other ways in which we can show that support?
Yeah. One of the other conversations that I have with women quite commonly is not mothering our men. And that sometimes we think that mothering is about, the cooking and the cleaning, and of course there's, sharing of chores around a house, that is, a natural thing that couples need to navigate between themselves. But oftentimes mothering comes across in an attempt to control a man's actions. So, oh, you should do this course, you should do this thing, on the weekend you should do that. Lots of like creating the direction for the man, trying to tell him how to live his life, rather than trusting that who he is, he can navigate his way. Because if we take the direction for his life, we also start to take the direction for the relationship. And that's part of what leads a man to feel that his direction, some of his inherent qualities, are not valued. So, one of my favorite questions to use is just to go to a man and be like, what do you think? To really invite and inspire that part of a man that does want to direct and lead. And I can still share from the place of my inspiration and the things that touch me, but I can share what touches me without telling a man what he should be doing, because that's when the mothering energy comes in, and then the polarity goes off, and then sex goes off, and yeah, it's not fun for anyone.
And you're in that spiral. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Amazing. Where can people go, Martina, to find out more about what you're doing and the work that you do? Because I literally am so deep in this conversation right now that I don't want it to end. There's so many more things I want to ask, and I recognize that we don't have, all day to be able to do that. So where can people go to follow with you?
Sure. So I have two websites. It's tantricblossoming.com or martinahughes.com. And I'm also on social media, so people can look me up on Facebook or Instagram.
Amazing. And what are you passionate about at the moment that you're really sharing with the world?
I'm passionate about these topics we've been sharing, supporting people to overcome sexual shame, to create quality relationships, and to really embrace that fulfillment starts on the inside. It's not something we get from the other person.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate the way that you show up supporting men in the way that you do and being a voice for that, and being unapologetic and unafraid to actually express that and bring these conversations to life. I really respect that and appreciate that about you. So thank you. And thank you for joining me on the show today. It's been so amazing. Really appreciate it.
It's been beautiful. Thank you so much, Sam. I've enjoyed talking with you, and I love everything that you're creating here. I love your questions and your insights and your passion for having these conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.